I never imagined that a bouquet of roses could shatter the fragile peace of my life. I was 39 years old when it happened, old enough to know that people rarely make mistakes when it comes to gestures of the heart, and yet naive enough to still cling to the hope that some things in life could be innocent. My name is Helena, and if you're listening to this, I suppose I should begin by admitting that what I'm about to tell you has haunted me for years. It began on Valentine's Day, but it didn't end there. In fact, that day was only the spark that ignited a fire waiting to consume everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and betrayal. That morning, the house was quiet. My husband, Michael, had already left for work, kissing me on the forehead in his distracted way, as if affection had become just another item on his to-do list. Our marriage, if I'm being brutally honest, had been fragile for a long time, cracks that we both ignored, silence that filled the air louder than words ever could. I had resigned myself to it, convincing myself that this was simply what marriage became after 15 years' routine. Muted, predictable. I remember making coffee, staring out the window at the brittle February light when the doorbell rang. Standing there was a delivery man holding the most exquisite bouquet I had ever seen, 12 deep red roses, delicate baby's breath tucked between them, wrapped in glossy paper with a satin ribbon tied in a bow. For a moment, I thought maybe Michael had remembered, that maybe under all that distance he still saw me, still loved me in a way that mattered. But when I opened the small white card attached to the bouquet, my heart stopped. Happy Valentine's Day, Helena. David. David, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. I stared at the name until the letters blurred into nothing. It had to be a mistake, I told myself. Perhaps the florist had gotten the names wrong. Perhaps there was another Helena somewhere in town. My chest tightened as if I was trying to hold my own heart inside. Because if it wasn't a mistake, then it was something else, something dangerous, something unforgivable. I hid the flowers in the laundry room, behind a pile of unfolded sheets. When Michael came home that evening, I forced a smile, cooked dinner, and tried to pretend my skin wasn't burning with the weight of that secret. But every time I looked at him, every time I tried to meet his tired eyes, I felt sick, because if I told him the truth, would he even believe me? Would he think I was imagining things, desperate for attention? The next day, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. I called my sister, Rachel. She was 2 years younger than me, always the beautiful one, always adored. Rachel had married David 10 years earlier, and from the outside, they seemed perfect, charming, successful. 2 kids in private school, the kind of couple who seemed untouchable. I asked her, as casually as I could, if David had sent her flowers for Valentine's Day. She laughed lightly, saying yes, a stunning bouquet of lilies. Then, with a pause so sharp I could feel it cut through the phone line, she asked, "Why?" I lied. I said nothing. I hung up soon after, but my hands shook for hours. Because now I knew it wasn't a mistake. He had deliberately chosen me, deliberately written my name, deliberately blurred the lines of loyalty and blood. For weeks, I said nothing, but silence, I've learned, doesn't bury the truth. It only lets it grow in the dark. David began sending me messages, short at first in innocent hope you liked the flowers. Then you've been on my mind. I ignored them, deleted them. prayed he would stop, but he didn't. He escalated, confessing in words what the flowers had whispered he wanted me. He claimed he had loved me first, before Rachel, but that I had been untouchable, too far away. And Rachel was the second best choice. I should have told Rachel immediately. I should have screamed the truth and thrown those messages in her face. But something ugly, something shameful inside me held me back. Because when someone tells you that you were the one they really wanted, even if it's wrong, even if it's destructive, some part of you wants to believe it. And after years of being invisible in my marriage, the attention felt like a cruel relief. But it wasn't love. It was poison. And like poison, it seeped slowly until it became unbearable. One night, Michael found me crying in the kitchen. He didn't ask why, just stood there, staring at me with eyes that looked more like suspicion than concern. "What's wrong with you lately?" he asked, his tone sharp. I shook my head, unable to tell him the truth. I wanted to scream. "Your brother-in-law sent me roses. He won't stop writing to me. He's breaking everything apart." But I stayed silent. Because what if Michael turned on me instead? What if he thought I'd invited it? I began to notice things. Rachel's laughter seemed louder, sharper, as though it were daring me to expose her perfect life. At family gatherings, David's gaze would linger on me too long, and I'd feel Rachel's eyes on us, suspicious, though she said nothing. It was as if we were all performing in a play, pretending nothing was wrong, while the ground beneath us cracked open. The breaking point came 6 months later, at my parents' anniversary dinner. We had gathered in their old farmhouse, candles lit, glasses of wine clinking. Rachel was radiant as always, David beside her, their children running in the yard. And yet, under the table, I felt the vibration of my phone. When I glanced down, my stomach dropped. A message from David. "I can't stop looking at you tonight." I excused myself to the bathroom, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall, to scream into the mirror, but instead, I just stood there, staring at myself. Was this who I had become? A woman too afraid to speak, too complicit in silence. When I returned, I caught Rachel's eyes across the table. She was watching me closely, her smile brittle, and in that moment, I knew. She knew. The weeks that followed were unbearable. Rachel stopped calling me. Our conversations turned cold, clipped, and then, one morning, she appeared at my doorstep without warning. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She held out her phone. On the screen was a thread of messages from David to me. He had sent them all to her, as if daring her to confront me. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. I tried to explain, to tell her I hadn't asked for it, that I had never encouraged him. But the words sounded hollow, because in her eyes, all she saw was betrayal. Not from him, but from me. That day, I lost my sister. She walked out of my house and never spoke to me again. But betrayal has a way of circling back, of eating away at those who cause it. Rachel might have turned her back on me, but the storm that followed tore her marriage apart. The messages became evidence in her divorce. David's career suffered under the scandal, their children caught in the crossfire. And yet, even as everything crumbled, The world pointed its finger at me. The whispers in the family were cruel, that I had seduced him, that I had destroyed my sister's life. I carried that weight alone. Michael withdrew further, his love fading into contempt. My parents looked at me with quiet disappointment, unable to say the words, but letting the silence condemn me. And through it all, I kept asking myself, was I the villain, or was I just another casualty of someone else's obsession? I tell you this because the story doesn't end there. The flowers were only the beginning. What followed was far darker. And the truth, well, the truth nearly destroyed us all. After Rachel walked out of my house that day, the silence she left behind was deafening. For weeks, I kept expecting her to call, to at least yell at me, to demand answers I could barely form in my own head. But nothing came. She vanished from my life as though I were already dead to her. And in many ways, I was. I had always thought that losing a sister would come through tragedy, maybe illness or some cruel accident, but never through betrayal. And yet here I was, mourning her as if she had died. Even though she lived just 20 minutes away, Michael noticed the shift too. He wasn't blind. He knew Rachel and I had been inseparable since childhood, and my sudden avoidance of her was impossible to hide. One evening, as we sat in the living room in that oppressive quiet that had become our normal, he asked, "What happened between you and Rachel?" His voice was low, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. I froze. My mind screamed to tell him, to unload the truth and beg for his understanding. But my throat closed. I thought about the texts, the flowers, the stares across the dinner table. I thought about how easy it would be for him to twist it, to see me not as a victim, but as a co-conspirator. So I shrugged, muttered something about sisters fighting, and retreated into myself. But secrets have a way of rotting in the dark. A month later, Rachel filed for divorce. Word spread quickly in our family. David had been unfaithful, they said. Rachel had proof. The whispers grew until they reached my parents, and then they reached Michael. And when they did, the thin thread holding my life together finally snapped. It was late at night when Michael confronted me. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, his face shadowed, his voice cold. "Was it you?" he asked. Just 2 words, but they cut deeper than any scream could have. I shook my head so violently it hurt. "No," I whispered, though my voice trembled under the weight of half-truths. "I never, Michael. I swear. I never did anything with him. I didn't want this." But Michael didn't believe me. I saw it in the hard set of his jaw, in the way he turned away from me and lay down without another word. Trust, once cracked, doesn't easily repair. And I realized that night that no matter what I said, no matter how I pleaded, the doubt would linger forever. The days that followed were suffocating. My parents looked at me with eyes that once held pride, but now brimmed with quiet disappointment. Family gatherings became unbearable, filled with whispers and glances I wasn't meant to see. I became the story no one told aloud, but everyone knew the sister who had ruined everything. I wanted to scream the truth, to pin all the blame on David, to expose him for the manipulator he was. But part of me still felt chained by shame. Another part of me feared Rachel's wrath, feared making things even worse for her children who were already suffering. So I stayed silent. But David didn't. He wasn't content to let me disappear into the background. One afternoon, I found another bouquet of roses on my doorstep. No card this time, but I didn't need one. The very sight of them made my stomach twist. I left them outside until they wilted, watching through the window as the petals shriveled into decay. I thought maybe that was a sign that his obsession was finally dying. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, Rachel showed up again. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow, but this time, she wasn't crying, she was furious. She slammed a stack of papers onto my kitchen table, her hands trembling. They were printouts of emails, dozens of them. Emails David had written, and ones he had claimed were from me. He showed these to his lawyer. She spat. He says you and he had an affair, that you encouraged it, that I was just collateral damage. My knees nearly gave out. That's not true, I cried, flipping through the pages. My name, my supposed words, twisted into lies I had never spoken. He had fabricated entire conversations, turning me into the villain in his desperate attempt to save himself. Rachel's eyes were filled with hate. You disgust me, she whispered, her voice shaking. Even if he made some of this up, even if half of it's lies, I know you didn't stop him. You let it happen. You let him destroy us. Her words cut me deeper than the lies themselves. Because in some small, hidden way, she wasn't entirely wrong. I hadn't stopped him soon enough. I hadn't shouted the truth before it was too late. I had hidden behind fear and shame. And now, Rachel's life and mine were burning because of it. When she left, slamming the door behind her, I collapsed onto the floor and sobbed until my body ached. In that moment, I hated David with a rage so intense I thought it might consume me. But I also hated myself for being silent, for being weak, for letting my sister carry the weight of betrayal that wasn't hers to bear. I knew then that I couldn't stay quiet any longer. If I let David rewrite the story, he would ruin me completely. And worse, he would keep destroying Rachel, twisting her pain into his weapon. So I gathered every message he had ever sent me. Every trace of his obsession I had tucked away in my phone. I made copies, printed screenshots, organized them into a file. My hands shook the entire time, but with each page, my determination hardened. If David wanted a war, I would give him one. But the moment I thought I had regained control, fate twisted the knife deeper. Because when I finally confronted David, when I stood in front of him with that file and told him I would expose him for the liar he was, he smiled, a slow, chilling smile that made my skin crawl. You think they'll believe you? He sneered. You've already been painted as the jealous sister, the lonely wife. Nobody will believe your side. They'll believe mine. They always do. And for a moment, I almost believed him. Because in our family, reputation was everything. And mine was already ruined. But I didn't know then how much darker this story would get. Because David wasn't finished. And the next move he made would shatter what little remained of my family and drag me into a nightmare I never saw coming. I should have known David wouldn't stop at lies on a page. Men like him never surrender quietly, they twist. They fight. They claw their way deeper into your life until you're choking on their poison. But even knowing that, I wasn't prepared for what he did next. It was a rainy Saturday when the knock came. I opened the door expecting a delivery, maybe a neighbor. Instead, 2 officers stood there, their uniforms dark against the gray sky. "Mrs. Carter," one asked. My throat went dry as I nodded. "We need to ask you a few questions." They stepped inside, their presence filling the room with a cold heaviness. Michael came out from the kitchen, confusion etched across his face. The officers explained that David had filed a harassment complaint against me, that he claimed I had been stalking him, sending him threatening messages, even showing up at his workplace. I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so backwards. But the look in the officer's eyes wasn't amusement. It was suspicion. And when I tried to explain, to tell them about the flowers and the texts, about the lies he had spun, they exchanged glances that told me they'd heard it all before. Michael stood silently as they spoke, his face unreadable. When they finally left, warning me to stay away from David for everyone's sake, I turned to my husband with tears burning my eyes. "You believe me, don't you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just walked back into the kitchen, the silence between us heavier than any accusation. That night, I lay awake replaying everything in my mind. The flowers, the texts, the dinner table stares, my sister's broken face, and now the police at my door. David wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation. He was trying to erase me completely, to make me the villain in every corner of the story until no one could see the truth. But as much as I feared him, as much as I wanted to curl up and let it all wash over me, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way Michael couldn't even look at me anymore. Maybe it was the memory of Rachel's eyes, filled with betrayal. Or maybe it was just the realization that if I didn't fight back now, I would never get my life back. So I dug deeper. I searched through every old email, every archived message, every photo and receipt that could prove my innocence. It became an obsession. I barely ate, barely slept. My house turned into a battlefield of papers and sticky notes, evidence scattered across the dining table. And then, late one night, I found it, buried in an old email thread. One David must have forgotten about, was a message so explicit, so damning, that there was no way he could spin it against me. He had written, in his own words, exactly what he felt for me, what he had planned. It wasn't just flirtation, it was obsession. A confession dripping with arrogance. I printed it out, my hands trembling. This was it. This was the weapon I could use to finally expose him. But I knew one piece of evidence wouldn't be enough. I needed witnesses. Someone who had seen his behavior. Someone who could back me up. That's when I thought of Rachel. It broke me to even consider reaching out, knowing how much she hated me, knowing how much pain I had caused her. But I also knew she had seen the signs. She had watched the way David looked at me, the way his lies piled up. Deep down, she had to know I wasn't the one who started this. So I called her. My voice shook as I left a message, begging her to meet me. "Please, Rachel, I need you to hear me out. Not for me, God knows you hate me, but for the truth, for your kids, for yourself." Days passed with no response. I was ready to give up when, finally, she showed up. She stood on my porch, her arms crossed, her face pale. You have 10 minutes, she said flatly. I ushered her inside, laid out the papers, the messages, the email that tied everything together. I poured my heart out, telling her I had never wanted this, that I had been terrified, that I had stayed silent out of fear and shame. Tears blurred my vision as I spoke. When I finished, Rachel stared at the evidence. Her face was unreadable, her jaw clenched. For a long moment, I thought she might just walk out again. But then, slowly, she sat down. I knew, she whispered finally. Her voice cracked. I knew something was wrong. I saw it in the way he looked at you, but I didn't want to admit it. It was easier to blame you than face what kind of man I married. Her words hit me like a blow. I wanted to embrace her, to tell her none of this was her fault. But the years of pain between us made the space feel insurmountable. Still, for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Rachel agreed to testify, to tell the truth about what she had seen, to admit that David's obsession had been real. Together, we began to build a case not just to clear my name, but to finally bring his lies crashing down. But David must have sensed what was happening, because just as we began to prepare, he made his boldest move yet. He showed up at my house. I'll never forget that night. The sound of his car in the driveway, the heavy knock on my door. When I opened it, his face was twisted with rage, his eyes wild. You think you can ruin me? He hissed. You think anyone will believe you over me? I stood my ground, though my knees shook. They'll believe the truth, David. They'll believe your own words. His expression darkened. He stepped closer, his breath hot against my face. You'll regret this, he whispered. You'll regret ever crossing me. And then he was gone, the slam of his car door echoing into the night. I locked the door, my hands trembling, my heart racing. For the first time, I truly feared what he might do. Because men like David, when cornered, don't just lash out, they destroy. And I had no idea how far he was willing to go. The night David showed up at my door, something inside me shifted forever. Until then, I had been wavering between fear and silence, unsure if speaking the truth would only make things worse. But seeing the venom in his eyes, feeling the weight of his threat in the air, it ignited a fire in me I didn't know I still had. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I wasn't just surviving. I was ready to fight. Rachel kept her word. She came with me to meet an attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Grant, who listened carefully as I laid out the nightmare piece by piece. Every text, every flower, every lie David had tried to spin. Rachel added her own account, how she had seen his behavior change, how she had caught him watching me across crowded rooms, how he had lied to her, too. Ms. Grant leaned back in her chair when we finished, her expression grave but resolute. This is more than harassment, she said. This is defamation, manipulation, and coercion. If you're willing to stand up in court, we can bury him with his own words. The thought of standing in court made my stomach knot, but the idea of letting David win was worse. So I agreed. For weeks, Rachel and I gathered evidence, preparing ourselves for the battle ahead. It was strange working side by side again. Strange to feel her presence in my life after months of silence and hatred. We didn't speak much outside of what was necessary, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wall between us began to crack. Michael, however, grew more distant by the day. He watched my every move with suspicion, as if waiting for me to slip, to confirm the lies David had planted. One night, I asked him outright if he believed me. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "I don't know what to believe anymore." Those words cut me deeper than anything David had ever done, because betrayal from a stranger is survivable. But doubt from the man you built your life with, that's a wound that never heals clean. The court date finally arrived on a crisp morning in early autumn. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, the air heavy with tension. David sat across the aisle, looking polished and confident, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He smirked at me once, as though certain he would crush me like an insect. But when the evidence was laid out, his texts, his emails, his obsessive words staring back at him in black and white, I saw his composure crack. The smirk faded. His jaw clenched. For the first time, it was him on the defensive. "Not me," Rachel testified with a steady voice, recounting the way he had cornered me in rooms, the way she had seen the truth but hadn't wanted to face it. She admitted her own anger at me, her own misplaced blame, and how David had twisted both of us in his web of deceit. By the time she stepped down, I could feel the shift in the room. The truth was undeniable. When the judge finally spoke, declaring David's claims baseless and ruling in my favor, a wave of relief crashed over me so violently I nearly collapsed. For months, I had been drowning under the weight of lies, and suddenly, I could breathe again. But victory is never as sweet as you think it will be, because the damage was already done. My marriage to Michael was beyond repair. He couldn't look at me without seeing doubt, without wondering what part of David's story had been true. We separated quietly a few weeks later. No dramatic fights, no screaming, just silence. The kind that comes when love has long since bled out. Rachel's marriage, of course, was already over. She moved into a small apartment with her kids, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes. We saw each other more often now, tentative steps toward reconciliation, but the scars remained. Our bond was forever changed, not destroyed, but reshaped by the fire we had walked through. As for David, his career crumbled under the scandal. The man who once carried himself with arrogance was left disgraced, his reputation in shambles. Last I heard, he had moved to another state, a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. I should have felt satisfaction at his downfall, some sense of justice. And maybe I did, in fleeting moments. But mostly, I just felt tired, because the truth is, betrayal doesn't end with a court ruling. It lingers. It seeps into the cracks of your life, reshaping you in ways you never asked for. I lost my marriage, my sister's trust, and the innocence of believing family could be safe. I learned that sometimes the people who smile at you across the dinner table are the ones holding the knife behind their back. And yet, I also learned something else. That silence is a prison. That shame feeds the lies of others. And that sometimes The only way to survive betrayal is to stand up, even when your voice shakes, even when you stand alone. Looking back now, I see that Valentine's bouquet for what it truly was, not a mistake, not even a gift, but a warning, a symbol of the poison David carried into our lives. I didn't see it then, but I see it clearly now. And though it nearly destroyed me, it also forced me to rise, to find a strength I didn't know I had. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: when betrayal comes knocking, whether in roses, in lies, or in whispers, don't let silence be your answer. Because silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the one who seeks to hurt you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if you've ever carried the weight of betrayal yourself, I hope you'll share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. I'd love to know if you've ever faced something similar, or if you found your own way through the fire. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe.